Hi, this is Schweet Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of A Quiet Place Day 1. I've been loosely following Lupita Nyong'o's career since 12 Years a Slave, so when I saw the trailer for A Quiet Place Day 1 and movie posters and whatnot in theaters some time back, I knew that I was going to see it. Pretty much, A Quiet Place Part 1 starts off in the midst of an apocalyptic type event. It reminded me a bit of Bird Box, where there's some sort of plague or a disaster strikes the world and people are trying to navigate as best as they can. Or even if you think of The Walking Dead or World War Z, the difference here is that there aren't zombies and the people aren't committing suicide. Instead, there are these weird looking creatures that are attracted by sound. And as a result of this, the characters have to protect themselves and avoid contact with these creatures by being quiet. It makes for a really cool concept. Day 1 is a prequel, where the series starts out with the characters in the midst of this situation. Day 1 is intended to provide an explanation of how things started. So the movie begins with a young woman in New York City, Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who unfortunately is dealing with cancer and is staying at an inpatient hospice center. Her and some of the other residents leave the center with a nurse for an outing to Manhattan. On the day of the outing, there are hints that something's going on in the city, as there's a lot of military vehicles present. Eventually, they receive word that people are being advised to evacuate Manhattan. Sam and her companions get caught up in the event, and the way that the creatures are introduced was insane. You see bits and pieces in the trailer where they're like these fireball-looking things flashing across the sky. With the original A Quiet Place, I felt like there weren't as many of the creatures, and the main characters weren't in a town or a heavily populated place. It was just a couple with their kids. They were out in an area where they had a reasonable amount of space, and there weren't a lot of other people running around. Now, imagine a place like New York City, where on a normal day you have millions of people bustling about. There are cars, buses, trucks, the train, all of these people and things moving around, creating a lot of noise. And in this environment, you're now requiring absolute silence or as close to it as possible. That alone adds a lot of tension. Coming into contact with other people where they're stressed out, their natural response to the situation, as would be most people's, might be to scream, to yell, to talk, and you have to stay quiet. That impulse that you would have, you have to control. You have to do that for yourself, but then also for the people around you. Now imagine trying to control noise in a place like Manhattan. It actually leads to some really cool scenes where the tension just ratchets up more and more. Sam is on the bus with the other patients when the attack begins. A bit after, she ends up back in the theater with the other members of the crowd. And everyone has sort of realized that they have to be quiet, but you have people who've been injured in the initial attack from falling debris. Imagine shrapnel blows into your arm or something, and in the midst of feeling excruciating pain, of being terrified, you have to be silent. What also added to it for me was I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in New York. I was a kid going to school on 9/11. I was actually in school and attended school within walking distance of World Trade Center. So when 9/11 happened, I saw the buildings on fire in person and walked through Manhattan heading north to my mom's job. Because of that personal experience, Day 1 was actually quite jarring for me. Because I know New York to be a very loud place with a lot of congestion, a lot of movement, lots of noise. And it reminded me of 9/11 where the vehicles that could tried to get out of Manhattan, so there weren't a lot of vehicles moving around. People that could tried to evacuate however they could. I walked north from Pearl Street up to 59th, which is a few miles. And with everyone still being in shock from what happened, being afraid that these terrorists might come back at any moment, I remember the streets for the most part being silent. And watching the movie, it struck me because they're dealing with an attack. Granted, it's like some kind of alien creature rather than other humans, but they're attacking. Everybody's dealing with their own thoughts, fears, concerns, and whatnot. So while there wasn't a lot of conversation, especially after the towers fell, if you wanted to talk, you could. There was no increased danger in you crying or speaking. It was just that most people didn't really want to talk or have regular conversations like it was a normal day. It was one thing in the movie when the characters were in the theater or in enclosed spaces where, sure, there's the threat of these creatures coming in, but the scenes out in the street were more jarring for me, especially one scene where people are trying to head towards an area to evacuate. It goes from the streets being desolate to have in these Manhattan-type crowds just a mass of humanity moving. Think about it, just the footsteps of all of those people. Someone might bump into something. Someone might touch something that makes noise. And again, there's like this detail where the camera zooms in on someone in a wheelchair, where the wheelchair is rolling along on the pavement, but it rolls over something. That makes a bit of noise. Someone else bumps or jostles something. That makes a noise. Someone steps on something. That's another noise. And on its own, these noises probably wouldn't be loud enough to draw the attention of the creatures. But with all of these people moving, even these little tiny noises, tense. Imagine you're by yourself trying to get through a minefield. That's stressful enough. But you can try to be careful when you take a step. Now imagine it's you and like 20,000 people trying to cross a minefield. Everyone has to watch their step, but eventually someone's going to land on something. I thought the movie was different and creative and just absolutely impressive. The story is great. I don't want to give away too much, but just the experience of being in the theater watching it was incredible. Sam has cancer and her prognosis is very negative, but she basically has this desire to get pizza one last time, and it becomes a driving force for her. I understood the desire as it's like, if it's the last thing she does, she wants a slice of pizza, as it has nostalgic significance for her. But then she had this cat, and honestly, I'm not a cat person, but I thought this cat was trying to kill them. Because, like the cat is doing its own thing, the cat is moving around, doing things that might bring the attention of these creatures. And it's like, the cat would have been on its own. The cat would just have to go off. The cat just goes off and does stuff. And in the midst of it, it's just making noise. The cat would have to take one for the team because it was a problem. Sam meets Eric, played by Joseph Quinn, and for a while, it's the two of them and this cat. Eric goes out into the street to try to find medication for Sam, and the cat follows. But then, the cat takes off running towards where some of the creatures are inevitably gathered. Personally, for me, that would have been the end of the cat. The cat made his own decision about life, and I feel like you're on your own now. Be free. You choose to go off and see what's going on without a care in the world. You'll have to just deal with whatever happens. The cat was a problem. There's this thing of trying to save the cat, and, Peter, don't come for me, but that cat was getting left behind, because honestly, forget about the cat. The creatures looked insane, and here, because the environment is more expansive, you might see one, and that's a problem. But then it's like these things can run, scale buildings, jump. You see one, but then here comes 5, and then there's another 10 behind that. The possibility that at a moment's notice there could be a swarm of these things near you is just insane. It's unclear if there's any way to try to kill them, so instead the focus is on trying to avoid them. Usually, I prefer thrillers to fantasy or sci-fi, because I feel like they can get a little bit ridiculous with things, which takes away from the experience for me. But I like that the entire story didn't just rely on these creatures. Your typical horror movie where you have the murderer or whatever it is, it might just be them chasing a character for the whole movie, and will they get away? That's it. That's the gist of the story. But I think the requirement for silence was an incredible stroke of genius. It just adds so much to the movie. And I know that I wasn't the only one that was into it. The audience was. A few weeks ago, I went to see Bad Boys, and when there's an explosion or someone says something funny, you'll hear laughter, people gasp if there's something unexpected that takes place. But here, the movie was silent, the audience was dead silent too. You turn off your cell phone, you try not to make a lot of noise in the theater, but often people are shifting about in their seats, munching popcorn. It's little noises, but not exactly distracting. But here it was just a little cough in the theater because it was so quiet. The audience really wasn't trying to make any noise. You could hear a cough. Someone a few rows back was adjusting in their seat, and it sounded like the loudest thing ever. And I think that just speaks to how immersive the film is, where it just really draws you in. And as an audience, there's no need for you to be quiet as well. But because you're so drawn into the story, you're quiet like the people in the movie have to be, because it's you're trying to listen for every and any little sound that might trigger these creatures. And as a result, you yourself end up being quiet. I think it's one of those movies that really benefits from being seen in theaters. The reason being that because the characters try to stay safe by remaining quiet, much of the movie is silent. There's very little in the way of dialogue, but what this means is that every little sound you hear ratchets up the tension, because you don't know how loud is loud enough to attract the attention of these creatures. Think of when you watch a scary movie. Quite often when a character is scared, they yell, or they scream when they see something scary and run. But imagine you're in a situation where your life is on the line. One of these creatures can attack you, but you can't scream. It's not just that you have to try to get to safety, but that you have to be absolutely silent, or as silent as you can be. This is one of the few movies where I think Dolby really makes a difference. I actually ended up seeing the movie in Dolby and Laser. I ran into some traffic due to the presidential debate being in my city and ended up missing the first 40 minutes of the movie during my first viewing. So I used my AMC Stubs membership to get a ticket to another showing in Laser. So I had a chance to compare the two. And it's like the audio for the regular Laser version of the movie is cool, but Dolby was a different level. The Dolby sound was very crisp and clear, and you felt the bass, but it didn't distort the sound. Dolby felt very immersive. I actually thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie in the theater. So often you don't really appreciate sound as much, but this is a movie where sound has to be limited for the characters to keep themselves safe. The quality of the sound, being able to hear even just like the smallest details, things dropping, characters brushing against things, being able to clearly hear those details where nothing is muffled just completely adds to the experience. Aside from that, I was actually very pleasantly surprised and impressed by the movie. I like thrillers. I don't mind horror movies, but they tend not to be my favorite genre because so often the movies aren't good. They tend to be B movies where the acting isn't that great, the storylines are ridiculous, or the premise is just unoriginal. And I find especially with slasher films, increasingly with horror films, that they try to capture the audience's attention through gore. Just buckets of blood or people exploding where it just gets ridiculous. The story and characters can fall by the wayside. But I was impressed here where A Quiet Place Day One actually hits on just all the right points. And not just that, you find yourself listening very closely. The actors and actresses have to convey and communicate so much with just facial expressions. That's a huge part of it. Because there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, but you find yourself watching and listening to every little detail. And then to add to it, you have this pretty interesting story. I love this movie. I've been looking forward to it for several months, and there's been a few other films where I'm looking forward to its release and end up being disappointed. Or it was good, but not amazing. But A Quiet Place Day One absolutely delivered. It was worth the anticipation and definitely satisfied my expectations. It checked all of the boxes for me. I'm happy that I went to see it and highly suggest to everyone else that they see this as well. I think you'll love it if thrillers, horror movies, or sci-fi is your bag. I highly recommend it, so go on and check out A Quiet Place Day One. I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.